Good evening, friends. You've made it. You're here. And now it's time to drift into something ancient. Something so deeply buried beneath the soil of time that just whispering about it feels like brushing dust off a fossilized dream. Dim your lights. Nestle under your blanket. Let your body soften into stillness. And if this quiet journey helps your heart slow down or your thoughts, untangle even just a little tap like and subscribe. Only if it feels right, maybe. Leave a sleepy thought down in the comments. What's your favorite ancient snack? Or the strangest one you can think of? Tonight, we'll go back further than kings, queens, or even pyramids. We're stepping into the chilly, brutal world of the Neanderthals. But don't worry, we won't get too rough. We'll just listen and wander and rest beside their ancient fires. The cold wrapped itself around everything back then. It wasn't like today's winter, where a coat and a cup of cocoa do the trick. This cold was persistent, like it had something to prove. It crept into bones, slowed thoughts, and demanded toughness. I want you to feel it now, but just gently, a crisp air brushing across your face, your breath forming tiny clouds that drift and vanish. Back then, long before the little ice age that chilled Europe in the 14th century, Neanderthals had already mastered the art of staying warm with only the barest tools and their own cleverness, and in that biting climate, they thrived. Somehow. But can you picture? No, not picture. Just feel what it might have been like. A flickering fire, the scent of burnt marrow rising as thick smoke rolls low along the cave ceiling. The steady drip of meltwater from icicles hanging above. And huddled around the warmth, a family, not so different from us. Their eyes gleamed with reflection, curiosity, and hunger. Always hunger. Let me tell you, hunger was more than a passing feeling in their world. It was a rhythm, a constant. Their lives moved to its beat every step. Every hunt, every fire sparked was to silence the stomach's growl. Ever chewed on dried meat so tough it could outlast a leather shoe? Neanderthals might have called that a delicacy. Though, to be fair, they had their own versions of sweet treats too. No, really. Some evidence suggests they may have foraged wild honey if they could brave the bees. Think about that. Climbing a tree, no gloves, no smoke, just stubbornness and sweet craving. All for a glistening drop of golden sugar. The closest thing they had to dessert. Kind of like the original caramel drizzle, minus the Starbucks. And here's something fascinating. Some Neanderthal teeth show traces of cooked starches. Not quite pizza crust, but maybe something like a hot, roasted root. Earthy, smoky, slightly charred. The ancient equivalent of a baked potato, maybe. What's wild is, this wasn't accidental. These weren't just primal grunters, munching on raw squirrel. They had fire, they had purpose, and they had taste. Ever wonder if one of them was the first to drop a root in the fire and discover it tasted better that way? Like, ugh, fire make dirt thing tasty. And suddenly, everyone wants their yams flame-kissed. History doesn't always feel personal, but this was dinner. And dinner is always personal. Let your breath fall into rhythm now, slow and even. Let the warmth of their fire wash over you. Listen to the low crackle. Feel the grit of ash beneath your palms. The weight of a fur cloak, heavy across your shoulders. Have you ever felt something so old, it felt like memory? That's where we are now. And I have to ask, if you were a Neanderthal, would you be the hunter, tracking prints through snow, wind cutting at your cheeks? Or the gatherer, eyes sharp, for berries or roots, hands stained with soil and sap? Either way, you're part of the clan. The fire is yours too. Let's stay here a while longer. There's still so much to taste. And remember, the fire burned low, but steady. It never roared. Neanderthals didn't waste flame. Each log, each chunk of dried bone or bark, was placed with care. The fire was more than heat. It was home, and around that warmth, the world outside could vanish for a while. The icy wind might screech through cracks in the rock. Wolves might howl in the distance. But here, inside this snug little cave, you could almost feel safe. That's something I think about often. Safety. What did it mean back then? Was it just a roof of stone, a good fire, a full belly? Or was it being surrounded by people who knew your face, your strengths, your smells, even your moods? We sometimes forget Neanderthals weren't loners. They didn't stomp through snow like angry cavemen in cartoons. No, they moved together, shared food, groomed each other, grieved the dead. They even buried their loved ones tenderly, with flowers in some cases. Yeah, flowers, laid beside a body like a lullaby. That's not brutality, that's poetry. Let's stay in that quiet space for a moment, where grief is gentle and memory smells like crushed herbs and cold moss. Beneath the surface of the earth today, archaeologists find teeth worn flat from chewing plants and tools shaped so precisely they could make a woodworker blush. From obsidian blades to bone needles, Neanderthals weren't just tough, they were thoughtful. Speaking of obsidian, have you ever seen it in person? It's volcanic glass, so sharp it can split skin with barely a whisper. Under moonlight, it gleams like it's alive. Now picture that. One of our ancestors crouched near a flickering flame, chipping obsidian, crafting a spearhead, not just for survival, but with pride. Like an artist whittling the perfect tip, thinking maybe this will be the one that brings down tomorrow's dinner. And dinner, oh, let's talk about that again, because even 70,000 years ago, the menu was surprisingly gourmet. Not in variety, sure, but in flavor, in experience. Oh yes, you've never truly eaten until you've roasted meat over an open fire in an Ice Age cave with no spice but hunger. Some days, they feasted on mammoth-rich, fatty, tough as leather but unforgettable. Other days, it was aurochs, the wild ancestor of cattle. Have you ever smelled sizzling fat from a beast that weighed over 1,000 kilos? That scent alone might have been their version of comfort food. But it wasn't just meat. They crushed pine nuts, roasted tubers, and even seasoned food with wild herbs when they could find them. Can you feel the crunch of a charred root between your teeth, still warm from the flames? Now, if you're wondering whether they knew the joy of sitting back after a meal, belly full, bones stretched out before the fire. Yes, absolutely yes. I like to think of those quiet evenings as their reward, their version of a movie night. No screen, no scrolling, just the crackle of fire and stories told in low, rhythmic voices. Not words like ours, but sounds, gestures, grunts layered with meaning. A wave of the hand, a twist of the mouth. Sometimes that's all you need to say. Today, I ran, I chased, I brought back food. You know, I've often wondered what was their laughter like. Did it burst out after someone slipped on a wet rock? Did it bubble quietly when a child stuck berries up their nose? Did they nudge each other and point at oddly shaped roots the way we point at cloud animals? Maybe that's why they lasted so long. Not just because they were strong, but because they found ways to feel joy in a brutal world. Because even in the shadow of glaciers and saber-toothed predators, they still knew how to share a joke, how to rest on, and speaking of resting, let your body soften a bit more now. You're safe here. The cold can't touch you. The hunger can't find you. You're just a guest by the fire, listening, drifting. You ever notice how the air changes after meat has been cooking for a while? It thickens, feels heavier, carries a hum that makes your mouth water even if you're not hungry. That's what it was like most nights in their shelter. Just a slow hum of heat, food, and survival. They didn't eat in silence either. There was smacking, slurping, maybe even a little bickering over the best cuts. The kids probably picked through bones for marrow. The elders might have leaned back, toothless, gnawing soft cartilage with quiet appreciation. And then, as the night wore on, the bones would be tossed aside. The coals would be banked. A thick pelt pulled tight over cold shoulders. One by one, they'd sleep. But not everyone at once. Someone always kept watch. Not because they didn't trust the night, but because they respected it. That's the thing. Neanderthals understood the world not just as something to conquer, but something to survive with. A living, breathing thing, the forest whispered. The rocks held memory. The stars, well, even back then, they stared upward. So now, let your eyes close, if they haven't already. You're surrounded by ancient warmth, a simple life. A brutal one, sure, but not without softness. We'll stay here a little longer, because there's still more to feel, more to taste. The night isn't over yet. The wind outside moaned like some old beast too tired to hunt. But inside, the cave held steady. The warmth from the fire soaked into the stone walls and lingered like a memory. Ash floated gently through the air, soft as dust from a forgotten book. And in that silence, when bellies were full and muscles heavy, dreams began to stretch their limbs. I often think, what did Neanderthals dream of? Did they revisit hunts that went wrong? Did they relive the moment a spear struck true? Or did their minds wander to the warm press of a loved one's hand, or the sound of water trickling over smooth stone? Maybe they dreamed of mammoths flying, or berries the size of fists, or a cave where it never snowed, and the fire never died. Dreams don't belong only to the modern mind. They've always crept in through sleep's soft door. And back then, even in the bitterest nights, they likely held on to stories, not written, not sung, but passed down through rhythm, through the beat of walking feet, the scrape of tools, the patterns in flames. We might not speak their language, but I think we'd recognize their silences, their sighs. The quiet way someone brushes hair from a child's forehead. That kind of love doesn't need words. But not everything was soft. There were dangers too. Dire wolves roamed in packs, and cave bears weren't just bedtime threats. They were real, and they were massive. One wrong turn outside could mean the end of everything. That's why every choice mattered. Where to build shelter, when to move, what to eat. Even their tools were a reflection of this care. A single flake of flint chipped wrong could cut the hand, or worse, fail in a hunt. That's why the best tool makers were prized, revered even. Their hands steady, their eyes sharp. There's something deeply beautiful about that craft, not as hobby, but as lifeline. Each tool had a story. Some blades lasted years, passed down like heirlooms. Others were tossed away after a single hunt, their job done, and food. Food was always on the mind. Some days it came as a herd caught off guard, a rabbit snared in the underbrush. Other days they'd chew bitter bark just to keep the ache down. Ever tasted something just to trick your body into thinking it's fed? That was survival. chewing twigs with faint sweetness, licking frozen bones for fat. But on the good days, oh, those were worth remembering. On the good days, they cooked marrow, thick, golden, rich, like the soup of the gods. The kind of flavor that coats the tongue and makes your toes tingle. They'd crack open long bones with stones, slurp the goodness out, then toss the leftovers into the fire, and roasted meat, slow turned on a spit of green wood, seasoned with nothing but smoke and hunger. You'd pull it apart with your fingers, licking the grease off each one like the meal might vanish if you didn't savor it fast enough. Evenings like that weren't just meals, they were rituals. They'd sit in a circle, shoulders brushing, breathing in sync. Not talking much, just being, letting the fire do the speaking. You can feel it now, can't you? The hush of it, the closeness, the way a simple meal could mean everything. And somewhere, in the quiet, someone would start a rhythm, maybe tapping to stones, maybe humming low and rough in the back of the throat. Music was never invented, it was remembered. They didn't need instruments. The body was enough, a hand to clap, a foot to stomp. Even the fire joined in with its little crackle and hiss. Let yourself sway with that rhythm now. Let it carry you, soft and slow, because tomorrow they'd move. Always moving, chasing herds, following seasons, tracking the sun across the sky. They didn't have maps, they had memory, and memory never led them astray. I think that's what I love most about them, the way they carried knowledge. Not in books, but in scars, in stories, in bones worn smooth by generations of hands. There's something comforting about that, about knowing that even in the most brutal times, people found a way to hold on to what mattered. Warmth, food, safety, each other. And as the fire faded and stars pierced the dark like quiet watchers, they'd sleep side by side. No mattresses, just moss, fur, and the soft press of another heartbeat close by. The cold couldn't win when they were together, and neither can it now. You're not out in the wind, you're here in the warm. In the story, let the ancient night fold around you like a second skin. Let the fire's last glow settle behind your eyelids. Let your breath match theirs, slow, steady, strong. We're not done yet. There's more to walk through. But for now, stay close. The snow is deep outside. The world is wide. But you are home. More warmth awaits, just beyond the next fire. Ask ChatGPT. The earth changed slowly, like a breath held too long. What had once been a hunting ground grew colder, darker. Seasons blurred. Glaciers crept across the land like silent giants. And in the middle of all that shifting, the Neanderthals kept walking. Not because they wanted to explore, but because staying still meant freezing or starving. The wind had teeth now. Long white fangs that bit through furs and cracked skin. And yet, step by step, they moved. Not just across plains, but across history. When people talk about resilience, they often think of grand gestures, wars, speeches, victories. But real resilience, it's quieter than that. It's the act of placing one foot in front of the other when everything hurts. It's boiling snow to drink. It's starting a fire with numb fingers. It's breakfast in a frozen world. And that's where we are now. You wake to the sound of ice dripping from the cave's edge. A pale blue light spills in from the mouth of the shelter, soft like early dawn through fogged glass. Your breath escapes in puffs, each one curling like lazy smoke. Someone is already crouched near the fire pit, blowing gently on the coals. Sparks twitch, flare, and catch, A few dry sticks added carefully. Then warmth blooms, slow and golden, and as it spreads, others stir. A child sneezes, someone groans and stretches. The rustle of furs, the faint crack of stiff joints, and then the smell. Not coffee though, wouldn't that be something? But roasted roots, pulled from last night's stash. Slightly sweet, slightly bitter. Like a prehistoric version of sweet potato, warmed against the stones. They pass it around, steam, rising in the cold air. Each bite soft and fibrous, earthy as the soil it came from. No butter, no salt, but nourishing, honest. You chew slowly, and with every bite, the chill lifts a little more. There's no talking yet, only glances, small nods, an understanding passed without a word. We're alive today. That is enough. Outside the snow is waist deep, crusted on top like a giant sugar shell, and beneath it, tracks, so many tracks. Some are fresh, some not. Someone sharp-eyed traces a set of hoofprints. Reindeer, maybe. Maybe something bigger. The kind of find that gets your heart thudding before you even stand up. The decision is made without discussion. 3 of them will go. They shoulder. Spears wrapped in sinew, tuck stone blades into leather loops. There's no bravado, no pep talk, just quiet purpose. You go with them. Your boots are nothing like theirs, just layers of hide tied with cords, but they hold. The snow squeaks with every step. The cold nips at your nose like a playful fox, and still they move like shadows. Hunting was never glorious. It was messy, silent, patient. Hours of tracking, days, sometimes, always alert, always ready. And then, the crunch, a branch, a flicker of movement ahead. A breath caught in the throat. That sound, that sudden sharp snap of hooves on ice. Your pulse jumps. The world narrows. They fan out slowly. One circles wide. Another lowers into the brush. You stay low too, your breath shallow. There's the animal. A red deer, heavy and slow with the weight of winter. Its coat is dusted with frost. Its ribs just visible beneath the fur. The throw must be perfect. There is no second chance. And then release. The spear slices the air in a low arc. It strikes. True, not instantly fatal, but enough. The deer stumbles, falls. There is no cheer, just relief. Hunger will wait another day, and, as they move in, finish the job swiftly. Thank the animal in their own quiet way. You feel it, the sacredness of the moment, the cost, the necessity. Blood steams in the snow. The smell is rich and metallic, sharp, enough to make your mouth water and your stomach twist at the same time. They butcher fast, efficiently. Organs first, liver, heart, kidneys warm and still pulsing. These are prized, not saved for later, but eaten now. On the spot, you try a piece. It's chewy, iron-rich, oddly sweet. Not your usual breakfast, but oddly satisfying. And then they wrap the meat in hide, sling it over shoulders, and begin the trek back. The sun is higher now, but offers no warmth. The cold just changes shade from pale blue to icy white. Back at the cave, others emerge, their faces lighting up as they see what you've brought. They don't clap, they don't cheer, but one woman reaches out, squeezes your wrist. That's their thank you. The fire is stoked high now. Stones heated red. Meat laid on flat slabs, sizzled gently as grease pops and crackles. And slowly, the cave fills with the smell of survival. You sit back, chewing hot meat, juice running down your chin, Someone chuckles nearby. A child giggles as they try to gnaw a piece bigger than their fist. For a moment, everything is perfect. The wind is still out there. The ice hasn't melted. But inside this circle, with grease on your lips and warmth on your skin, the world feels kind, and in that kindness, there's peace. Stay there for a bit. Let it soak in, the heat, the laughter, the knowledge that you helped feed the tribe today. And maybe, just maybe, someone will tell a story tonight about you, the hunt, the silence before the throw. But for now, rest. Let your belly settle. Let your breath slow. There's more to walk through still, and more warmth waiting ahead. By nightfall, the meat was hung on racks, smoke curling through the cave in thin, lazy trails. Outside, the sky had gone the color of old slate, streaked with hints of firelight and frost. Stars blinked through, ancient and familiar, the same. Stars we still see today, inside. The air was thick with warmth and the sweet charred scent of fat. Crickets, quiet all day, now whispered in the stillness. A low, slow hum, like the earth itself exhaling. You could feel it in your bones, the fatigue of a good day. Not just survival, but success. The kind of weariness that feels earned. They didn't celebrate with wine, or feasts, or firecrackers. That wasn't the Neanderthal way. But they had their own kind of joy. A kind of quiet reverence for small comforts. A mother carved a toy for her child from antler a tiny mammoth. Smooth and rounded. No fancy details, just shape and spirit. The child clutched it tightly, thumb rubbing the surface smooth. That's how memories were made. Through touch, through time. Someone shared a treat, fermented berries found clumped under a bush weeks ago, tucked in a hide pouch, and left to soften, sweet, with a tenth that puckered your lips. It tingled on the tongue, like ancient soda. They laughed after tasting it. Not because it was funny, but because it felt human. A little luxury in a brutal world. Every group had a trick like that. A secret stash. A cherished find. It reminded them that life wasn't only about enduring. It was also about enjoying. Even for a moment. And that moment came in the glow of the fire, when someone stood, turned toward the flickering wall, and began to draw. They didn't use words. They used soot, ochre, fingers. They pressed shapes onto stone, a herd of reindeer in motion. A man with a spear. A spiral that might have meant a river, or time, or something else entirely. No one interrupted. No one needed to. That was their book, their Netflix, their campfire tale. You leaned in to watch, the warmth of the stones against your back, and something in your chest ached in a good way. Like watching someone say exactly what you were thinking, without speaking at all, did. They know those drawings would last 40,000 years. Probably not. But they made them anyway. Because art isn't about legacy. It's about being alive. The fire popped, sending a burst of sparks into the air. Someone tossed on a fresh log, and the shadows danced again. The artist stepped back, eyes scanning their work. Then a nod, not of pride, but of peace. It was done, not perfect, not permanent, but present. That's what Neanderthals were masters of being here. In this breath, this bite, this fire. You didn't need to ask where you belonged. You felt it, and so sleep came easily that night. Furs were piled high, the floor soft with moss and hides. You curled near the fire's glow, your breath sinking with the others. In, out, in, out. The hum of the night grew quieter, Crickets slowed, wind hushed. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient rhythm, and in the safety of the stone, surrounded by warmth, the stories settled into your bones. There would be storms ahead, blizzards that would last days, tools that would break, losses no one could plan for. But tonight was not about tomorrow. Tonight was about stillness. You let your body grow heavy. Let the images on the cave wall flicker one last time before darkness. Folded over them like a blanket. Let go. Because in the quiet breath of a Neanderthal night, even history falls asleep. The weather had begun to shift again. Not all at once, just little hints. The way the wind tugged more sharply at the firs. The way the birds had vanished from the trees without song or warning. They could feel it coming, something colder, something longer. A change in season didn't mean flipping a calendar. It meant hunger. It meant questions. Would the herd return? This year, had the berries ripened early or late? Would the rivers freeze solid again? These weren't just curiosities. They were survival. And to Neanderthals, the answers lived in the land, in the way moss curled differently before frost, in how deep the burrows went, in the silence of the owls. They watched everything. A group had set off just after sunrise, not far, just a scouting path, but it took them through a stretch of forest that had grown uneasy, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. You followed them, not because you knew the way, but because you trusted the rhythm of their steps. Each one moved like they'd done it 1,000 times. The way they pressed fingers to tree bark to feel how dry it was, how they sniffed the air, not for flowers, but for the metallic scent of snow. That's how you noticed the tracks, not hoof, not claw. Something broader, heavy, deep, set to cave. Bear, maybe. Or worse, something new. Something unexpected. That's when they stopped. No panic, just stillness in the wild. Silence isn't absence. It's communication. One of them picked up a fallen branch and snapped it in half clean, quick. The sound traveled far. A warning or a signal. Nothing answered. They turned back, steps faster now, eyes scanning every shadow. You could feel it. The press of the unknown against your back. That tightness in the chest. Not fear, not yet, just tension, drawn like a bowstring. By the time you returned to the cave, night was already crawling down the mountains. The sky turned that dark blue that lives just before black. The fire was lit, but no one sat close. A few stood near the entrance, scanning the horizon, and there it was, that sound again. Faint, low, not a growl, not a howl, something older, something wrong. The elders exchanged glances, no words, just looks. They didn't need a council meeting. They knew what to do. They began sealing the entrance, not with bricks, just stones, branches, heavy hides stretched tight. It wouldn't stop a determined predator, but it slowed the wind and whatever else might be sniffing its way across the snow. Inside, the fire burned hotter. Someone tossed herbs onto it, pungent and sharp, not for cooking, for masking scent. The smell wrapped around you like a cloak. Smoke, pine, blood, bark. No one was eating tonight. They sat in a circle, backs touching, eyes to the walls. You could hear every breath, every crack of the firewood, every shuffle of a foot across the dirt. This was not panic. This was readiness. Even the children stayed still, wide-eyed, clutching stones like dolls. You thought about the warm marrow from the day before, the soft chuckle of the child with the carved mammoth, The giggle around fermented berries. It all felt further away now, like a dream, and yet no one left the circle. No one asked to be alone. They simply waited. A single flame, one small world. That's how they did it. That's how they outlasted the cold, the storms, the teeth in the dark. They didn't fight it alone. They closed their eyes together. They leaned into each other. They trusted their circle. And maybe that's what we forget sometimes. That safety doesn't mean nothing bad can happen. It means not facing it by yourself. Outside, the night thickened. The stars disappeared behind. Low clouds, and whatever had been moving in the woods, kept moving, but it didn't come closer. Not tonight. Eventually, someone stood and fed the fire. Another unfurled a hide and laid down. Then another. Then you. The warmth returned, little by little, not from the flame, but from the bodies beside you. They didn't need lullabies. The fire was enough. The breathing, the closeness. And so, even as the wind howled, even as the forest whispered warnings, sleep returned, because danger comes and goes, but trust that stays. And tonight, like so many nights before, they endured, not with swords, not with walls, but with each other. Morning didn't come with birdsong this time, just light, pale and slow, filtering through the cracks like it had second thoughts. The kind of light that makes everything look old as stone, skin, memory. The storm had passed. Outside, the snow had settled into long drifts, sculpted by wind into shapes that could have been anything: a sleeping bear, a crouching hunter, the curved spine of a mammoth beneath the white. They emerged one by one, brushing ash from shoulders, blinking into the chill. No words at first, just long breaths, the kind that fog up and disappear before you can hold them. A few stepped off the path, their legs vanishing knee-deep in the snow. Someone laughed, quietly. It sounded like relief. Tracks from the night before were half-filled, smoothed over, like the land was trying to forget. But not quite. One elder leaned close to the earth and touched a melted hollow in the snow with their palm. Still warm. Something had been there. Not long ago. They said nothing. Just stood, nodded once, and turned back to the group. Whatever had come close, it had changed its mind. No hunt today. No long journeys today was for checking the traps, repairing, tools, holding the quiet. They fanned out in small pairs, staying close to the cliffs. You followed one who moved with careful patience, each step tested before weight was given, each glance a lesson. The trap was old, just a loop of cord in the snow, tied to a bent sapling. But it had worked. Inside was a hare, limp, fur-streaked, with red, not much meat, but enough. They held it with a kind of respect, not reverence, but gratitude. Then reset the trap, eyes scanning the trees for signs of more. That's the thing most people don't realize. Neanderthals didn't hunt for sport. They hunted because the body demanded it, but they also shared, always. Even the smallest catch would be split, not just with the strongest or the loudest, but with the old, the injured, the very young. That's how the group stayed whole. That's how knowledge survived longer than bone. Back at the shelter, the hare was skinned in near silence. The pelt would be dried, scraped, softened, eventually sewn into a mitten or wrapped around a child's feet. Nothing wasted. The meat was roasted quickly, the scent curling upward, gamey, nutty, sharp with wood smoke. You took a bite when it was offered. It was dry, chewy, but good. It clung to your teeth a little, left a warmth in your stomach that stayed. And then they rested. Not sleep, not yet, just rest. They sat on their heels, watched the sky, listened to the groan of the trees in the cold. A woman braided cord from sinew. Her fingers moved slowly, expertly, without looking. The rhythm of generations. A child traced circles in the ash with a stick. No reason, just feeling the shape of the world. You laid back, let your head touch the packed earth, and looked up through the cave's open ceiling, where smoke slipped out like a spirit. Above, a hawk drifted in long loops, watching perhaps the same way you were, and it hit you not like a flash, but a soft wave. The world they lived in was bigger than danger, bigger than cold, bigger even than time. It had flavor, texture, sound, not just survival, but music, breath, small joys, stitched together across centuries. The wind rattled the trees again, but not in warning this time, just a reminder that it's always moving, always whispering. The Neanderthals knew it wouldn't last. Nothing ever did, but they also knew how to stay present, how to live inside a single bite of roasted meat, a single breath of wood smoke, a single brush of warmth from someone sitting near. And maybe, in some way, that's what lasted longest. Not their tools, not even their bones, but the quiet legacy of being deeply, utterly alive, even in the middle of the cold. So for now, let your thoughts settle like snow. Let the wind pass by. We'll walk again soon, but tonight, rest where they once rested, right here, where the fire hums low and time has no sharp edges. The cold had a way of creeping in, not with a shout, but a whisper. It slipped through gaps in the stone, tucked itself behind the shoulder blades, and settled into your breath like dust. They didn't fight it. Not really, they adapted. The hearth fire had been rebuilt lower in the cave, away from the draft. Its embers pulsed a gentle red, soft as the glow behind your eyelids when you rest them near the sun. You could hear someone sharpening a flint blade. Slow, steady strokes. The rhythm felt like a lullaby, but with a bite. They were preparing for something longer than a storm. This was deeper. It was the kind of season where the snow didn't just fall, it stayed. It claimed Dot, and still, there was peace, because they knew this pattern. They'd survived the cold before, not just once, but many times. Through what we'd later call the last glacial maximum, when sheets of ice pressed down across entire continents. Can you picture that? Europe not as wine and gondolas, but as tundra. Treeless, endless, brutal. Yet here they were thriving. Not with castles or kings, but with grit, with skill, with fire. Someone was boiling bones in a clay-lined pit, not just for broth, but for glue. The fat rose to the surface in milky bubbles, popping gently, releasing a smell that was both rich and slightly sour. A child stirred the pot with a stick longer than they were tall. Carefully, reverently, their hands were pink from the cold, knuckles cracked, but their eyes focused, bright. They knew this mattered. A little glue might mean a spear held together just long enough, or a broken tool got one more life, or a hide stayed sealed against the wind. Not everything they made was beautiful, but everything had a reason. You might look at their tools today in a museum: chipped stone, burnt bone, cords made from twisted gut sand. Call it primitive, but that word misses the point, because these weren't just survival objects, they were extensions of memory. This flint, sharpened by a grandmother's hands. That scraper, used by a hunter who never came back, but left the story of his last meal embedded in the wear pattern. Every scratch, every edge, every smoothed over handle told a story without sound, and they passed these down not as relics, but as companions. When they hunted, they didn't just carry tools, they carried time. You sat with one of them now, an older man whose face looked carved from bark. He held a blade so small it barely caught the light. "This was my brother's," he might have said. If words were used like that, he made it when we were still learning. He bled on it, he laughed at it, but it worked. Then he tucked it into his pouch like it still held warmth. Outside, snowflakes began, again slow, steady, thick as feathers. No alarm, no rush. The hides were already pulled tight over the cave mouth. The fire was stoked. The people were fed. There would be no hunt. Today, no gathering, just tasks. Just rhythm, and that was okay, because winter wasn't something to beat. It was something to listen to. So they listened to the hum of bone broth, to the soft clink of stone, to the wheeze of the wind as it curled around the cliffs, and to each other, because in a world without walls or clocks or headlines, time moved differently. It didn't rush, it circled, so they moved with it, and tonight, so do you. Let the cold stay outside, let the fire do its slow work, and let this story, this breath of the past wrap around you like a fur-lined thought. By midday, the snow had thickened, not just in the air, but in the way it shaped the world. Sound moved slower, light bounced in strange ways, even breath took effort. But inside, something unexpected happened. Someone started to hum. It wasn't a song the way we think of one, just a few notes repeated over and over. Low, deep, kind of like the sound a bear might make if it was trying to sing to a newborn. And it worked. Heads lifted. A child clapped softly. A woman near the fire gave a little snort that could have been laughter or just a reminder that life still had teeth. That's something you notice the longer you spend here. They didn't just endure, they laughed, not often, not loud, but in these strange little moments, like when the fermented berries went a little too fermented, and someone tripped over their own feet trying to impress a girl with an antler hat, or when two boys tried to sneak a roasted lizard past the elders and got caught by the smell of burnt tail. You could almost hear one of them mumble, "I thought you were watching it," while the other just shrugged, licking his fingers. Even here, in this ice-laced silence, humor flickered. And maybe that's what kept them warm when nothing else could. They didn't have bread ovens, or salted meat, or thick boots. What they had was closeness, the kind that came not from comfort, but from knowing you needed each other. That if your spear broke, someone would hand you theirs. That if your foot slipped on the ice, there would be hands, big, rough, calloused, hands ready to pull you up. A group had begun skinning a large frozen deer brought in the week before. It had taken 3 days to thaw, just enough to work with. The hide peeled back like old parchment. Underneath, the muscle had frozen in a burst, like the deer had been caught mid-sprint. Its meat was tough, slightly sour, but filling. They'd stew it later, break it apart with flint flakes, maybe smoke what was left to carry on the next move. One of the women pulled a chunk of fat from the side and held it up to the fire. It began to melt instantly, dripping into a carved wooden bowl. You could smell it thick, savory, almost buttery, like the world's oldest soup starter. Someone dipped a bit of root into it and handed it to you. It was chewy, earthy, oddly sweet, A Neanderthal delicacy. Think of it as the closest thing to a paleo-French frianly without the fry or the French. Just root and fat and fire. And somehow it hit the spot. That's how they ate. No feasts, no fanfare. Just what worked. What filled. What made it a little easier to face the next breath. A few of the younger ones sat near the back wall, shaping balls of clay from riverbanks long buried under snow. They pressed thumbs into them, stuck in pebbles, scraped lines with bone needles. They weren't making tools. Not really, just shapes. Little faces, marks, a mammoth with stick legs. A wavy line that might have been the river, or a snake, or time. No one scolded them. No one asked why. Because expression, even in a frozen world, had value. Some of those tiny pieces would be lost in the dirt, crushed under footsteps, forgotten, and some would be found tens of thousands of years later, in caves with names like Brunequel and Laferasi, under layers of soot and silence. Proof that even when life was hardest, they created, they played, they left little parts of themselves behind. And maybe that's why we feel something when we see those old handprints on stone walls. It's not the pigment or the precision, it's the message. I was here, so simple, so human. The wind outside shifted again. A long moan, low and curling. Someone adjusted the hide door, added another stone. No rush, they knew how to wait. Waiting wasn't wasted, because inside the cave there was warmth, movement, connection. Someone scratched lines into Bontali marks, maybe, or a story no one else could read but them. Another crushed dried herbs into powder between two stones. A child curled up near the fire, drooling slightly, dreaming of mammoths that didn't run. And you sat with your back against the wall, fingers warm again, stomach full of something smoky and strange. You closed your eyes for just a moment, and the world faded into breath, and fire, and the softness of stone. Let that be enough for now. Later that night, the fire burned low, just a line of coals now, pulsing like sleepy stars beneath the ash. No. One spoke sleep had crept in like Moslow, quiet. Without asking, the youngest were already curled into warm bundles. Fur piled high, tiny feet sticking out like roots from a blanket of soil. A few of the elders remained seated, not asleep, but not entirely awake either. Watching, listening. The cave had grown still, only the occasional crackle from the hearth, or the stretch of a hide settling over cold stone, stirred the silence. It was in this hush that stories lived, not stories told aloud, not tonight, but remembered, passed from eye to eye, from hand to hand. A scar here, a chipped tooth there, a look that lingered too long on the fire. You could feel it, a weight to the stillness, but not a heavy one, more like a quilt, wrapped around time. Itself, you shifted, just slightly, so your shoulder touched the cool rock of the wall. It grounded you, as if the cave itself was a living thing, watching over everyone, holding its breath with them. Someone stirred, a quiet murmur, then stillness again. Outside, the snow had stopped. You could hear it. The quiet was different now, more open, and then faint at first as sound drifted in through the stone. Wolves far off, not hunting, just calling to one another, the way family might check in even when they're miles apart. One call, then another, echoed, faded, and somehow comforting. You wondered if the Neanderthals feared the wolves, but the truth is, they probably understood them better than we do. After all, both hunted the same game. Both traveled in groups. Both watched the skies for change, and the ground for signs. Some even say it was the Neanderthals who first grew close to them, who fed them scraps, who noticed which pups stayed near the fire and didn't bite the hand that fed them. A long, slow friendship that would echo into our time. You could almost see it now. A young hunter sharing a strip of meat with a curious shadow, a low growl, then silence, then trust. It's funny how the smallest moments leave the longest trails. Someone near you sighed in their sleep, a deep round sound, like the cave exhaling. You closed your eyes and let yourself drift to not fully asleep. Just close, letting your thoughts soften, letting the cold stay outside, letting the fire's memory linger on your skin. Like a dream, this is what they knew. That survival wasn't just about the strong. It was about the quiet ones, too. The ones who listened, who watched the sky, who shared the last bite, even when there wasn't enough, who told stories with their hands, and made music from breath. They didn't call themselves Neanderthals, didn't write their names, didn't leave maps or manifestos, but they left echoes in the earth, in the fire, in the way we sit close, even now, when the wind howls, so rest. Here, where the old ones rested, let the stone hold you, let the past wrap around you, not as a weight, but as a blanket, and soon we'll step forward against a little deeper into the frost, just a little further into the dark, but never alone. The light had changed again, not quite dawn, but not full dark either. That quiet hour when the world feels like it's waiting, holding its breath, just for a moment. You sat near the edge of the cave now, watching your breath curl into the air like thin ribbon. The fire behind you whispered low, stretching out one last glow before it sank into the coals, and across the snow-covered plain, the sky was bruised with pale orange, like someone had dipped a mammoth tusk in berry juice and dragged it across the clouds. Still no birds, not in this season, but the air was moving differently, less harsh, less sharp. A shift was coming. You could feel it in your bones, so could they. The quiet bustle had already begun. Not loud, not rushed, just the soft shuffle of feet on stone, the rasp of fur being folded, the muffled cough of someone still half-dash asleep. They were getting ready to move. Not far, just a short migration. To a warmer hunting ground, maybe. A valley with less wind. A cave that let in more sun. It was never random. There were roots, old as the bones buried beneath them, passed down not by map, but by memory. A certain bend in the river. A tree shaped like a bent arm. A ridge where the wind always howled twice before snow. The world had no signs, but they knew the way. One of the older women packed dried roots into a basket made of woven reeds and hide. She tested each one for mold, discarding the soft ones, pressing her thumb into the firm ones. It was slow work, repetitive, but not boring, because each step had meaning. Every root saved meant a little less hunger. Every hide folded meant one fewer cold night. This wasn't just survival, it was preparation, a kind of ritual. And as you sat there, hands still warm from sleep, nose cold from the morning air, you realized how rhythmic it all was. Even the uncertainty had its patterns. They didn't fear the journey ahead, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. There was strength in that, a kind of quiet courage that didn't need to shout. Someone called out softly, 2 quick clicks of the tongue. A boy had found a tool buried under snow. One of the good ones, the sharp kind. Black flint, with a gleam like wet obsidian, it was. Wrapped in a scrap of hide, half frozen, half lost. The boy handed it to his mother like treasure, and, in a way, it was. Tools weren't just objects, they were inheritance. You didn't own a blade, you borrowed it from the past, and hoped to pass it on again. She examined it, nodded, and slipped it into her pack with care, as if to say, yes, we'll need that. Always the same steps. Break camp, gather food. Tie the bundles with sinew, not too tight or it would snap when it dried. They worked in near silence, not out of somberness, but out of knowing. Words weren't wasted here. They weren't needed for every little thing. A glance, a gesture, that was enough. And as you watched them prepare, a strange calm settled over you, because even in all this cold, there was warmth in the hands that worked, together in the fire that never truly went out, in the knowledge that whatever came next, no storm, stampede, starvation, they would face it the way they always had. Together, so breathe in that morning air, let the frost sharpen your senses, and walk with them, one quiet step at a time, into what comes next. The first stretch of the journey was always the hardest, not because of danger, but because of the weight. Every pouch mattered. Every scrap of hide, every dried sliver of root tucked away into bark containers. Nothing was extra. Nothing was for later. Everything carried had a purpose, and yet it was heavy. Physically, yes, but also emotionally. Leaving a cave wasn't just leaving shelter. It was leaving safety. Memory. The soot-stained marks on the wall that someone had etched with a burnt stick. A pile of discarded bones in the corner that told a winter's worth of meals. The smooth spot on the floor where someone always sat. Now, it would all be left behind, covered in snow by the time they returned. If they returned, still they moved, wrapped in furs, feet bound with sinew and old leather. Walking with poles made from stripped birch, tips charred for strength. There was a rhythm to it. Step, breath, crunch. Step, breath, crunch. And all around, silence. Not a single bird, not even a whisper of wind, just the snow beneath and the weight above. You walked with them, a little behind, not leading, not lagging, watching how they moved. How they shifted bundles from one shoulder to the other, how they kept the children between them, never out front, never at the back, always guarded, always warmed by the bodies around them. One of the older men muttered something to himself, a string of soft clicks and hums, not a chant, not a prayer, more like a memory being aired out. He was probably thinking about food. They all were. The last of the dried deer was nearly gone. There'd been a bit of fermented root left over, sharp, vinegary, with a taste like sadness, but even that was now packed deep in someone's pouch. A hunt would need to happen soon. They knew it. You could feel the tension in their shoulders, the glances to the treetops, the faint way their eyes scanned the ground for tracks. Not panic, just awareness, and still. There was beauty. The way the frost turned branches into crystal. The curve of the river below, frozen like glass pulled taut. The echo of a snapped twig bouncing off the cliffs, as if the mountain itself was waking up. Someone started to hum, again, low, off-key. The same 3 notes over and over. It wasn't annoying, it was anchoring. You found yourself following the sound, like a thread pulling you forward through the white. A small child, her cheeks red with cold, tripped over a root and went face first into the snow. No one gasped. No panic. Just a quiet chuckle from one of the women. She scooped the girl up, brushed the snow from her eyebrows, kissed her on the forehead, and handed her a piece of frozen root to chew on. And the girl, she giggled. A real one. A laugh that bubbled. Up from somewhere deep, like a spring that hadn't frozen. You smiled, because even here, in a world colder than we can truly grasp, there was joy. They reached a grove of pine trees by midday. Tall, ancient, their bark stripped in patches where elk had rubbed themselves raw. A good place to rest, to drink meltwater from cupped hands, to check on swollen feet, to whisper a joke or two before moving again. Someone shared a sliver of dried met a piece, so tough it might have been bark. Still, it was passed around like treasure. You chewed, it had the texture of sandal leather, and the taste of pure endurance. You swallowed and gave a thumbs up, that got a small grin from the boy next. To you, no words. Just shared discomfort, and the strange comfort in that. Because out here, you didn't need much to feel human. Just warmth, and someone to laugh with. Even when the food tastes like frozen regret. So you leaned back against a tree, watching your breath fade into the canopy, and let your body rest. Even if only for a moment. Soon they'd rise again, and the trail would call. But right now, this moment was enough. That night, they didn't make it to a cave. There wasn't one nearby. Instead, they stopped beneath a shallow overhang stone draped in icicles, sharp as fish spines, but strong enough to shield them from the worst of the wind. They worked fast, not frantic, just efficient. Rocks were stacked to form a crude windbreak, hides stretched across wooden frames. A small pit dug for fire, lined with charcoal and ash from old stops. This wasn't their first camp here. You could tell, the earth remembered. And once the fire took, tinder caught from the last glowing ember, cradled in a horn, they settled. In dot, the fire crackled low, sending up little hisses, like it was arguing with the snow, and around it, the group softened, boots removed, cold toes stretched toward heat, faces slackening, no longer tight from the sting of wind. You lay back against your bundle, watching the smoke rise in lazy loops. There was a kind of music to it all. Not the kind with notes or rhythm, just the quiet melody of survival. A child held a carved bone in her hands, polished smooth from years of touch. She turned it over and over, not playing with it exactly, more like letting it speak to her. It had markings, tiny notches, not quite writing, but close. The start of something. A tally, maybe, of days, of hunts, of seasons past. They didn't have books, but they had memory. And objects like these carried more than weight. They carried story. She tucked it back into her satchel, then leaned against her mother. Eyes fluttering closed. Another man passed around a bundle of something warm. You were surprised to see it was cooked, marrow cracked open earlier, roasted near the edge of the fire, still soft inside. You took a bite. It was thick, rich, like savory pudding made of fire, and bone, not the prettiest texture, kind of like warm candle wax. But it filled you. You could feel it spreading warmth through your chest, your arms, the tips of your fingers. Someone passed around a joke in clicks and hums. The kind of joke that didn't translate, but still made three people snort into their hands. You smiled without knowing why. Sometimes laughter is its own language. The sky outside had gone indigo, the stars dimmed by thin cloud. Somewhere beyond the hills, a new storm was building. You could hear the air tightening. Still, no one rushed. Because this camp, like the others, was just for now. Not forever, but enough. They'd move again tomorrow, or the next day, depending on the cold, depending on the signs. A strip of birch bark curled in the fire. Someone pulled it out before it burned completely. They scratched something into it with a shard of flint. A shape, a line, maybe a map, or maybe just a reminder. You closed your eyes, listened to the way. The wind softened once it passed the rock wall. Heard the faint shift of fur as someone turned in their sleep. Felt the warmth of bone broth settling in your stomach like a lullaby. And just before you slipped into rest, you thought of something odd, how even now, even in your own time, we still do the same. We gather. We eat strange little snacks. We whisper jokes in the dark. We move from place to place looking for warmth, for a place to rest, for something better just over the hill, not so different after all. And with that thought, you let go. Let the cold stay outside. Let the stars wheel overhead without you. Let the warmth of ancient lives fold over you like a second skin. Because tomorrow will come, and so will the trail. But for now, here beneath icicles, and sleep has already found you. They didn't call it spring. Not exactly. There weren't names for seasons, carved in bark or spoken aloud around the fire. But they knew. They felt it in the way the air shifted. How it no longer bit, but brushed. How the snow softened, crusted at the edges like old bread left too long in the sun. How the birds began to return, not all at once, but in little bursts of movement, flutters, feathered scouts checking in. You stirred as one of them called overhead. A sharp, clipped sound, not melodic, but alive, and that was enough. The camp had already begun to change. What was once a clutch of firs and stone circles now rippled with movement. People gathering sprigs of green, tiny shoots pushing through the wet soil like secrets. Berries were still weeks away, but roots, they could be coaxed from the mud now, scraped clean with shells, washed in meltwater. It was a good sign. Hunger didn't end in spring, but it started to get less loud, and that was everything. The hunters returned. Just before midday. They weren't loud, no whoops, no drumbeat, just the steady approach of feet over thawed ground. But the scent gave them away, that rich iron tang that said meat, and not old meat, not dried or buried or frozen, fresh, the kind that dripped when cut, that sizzled when it met heat, that brought every head in the camp to attention. Like a whisper in a quiet room. You moved closer as they laid it out. Not a mammoth knot this time. Smaller, but still impressive. A reindeer, maybe. Hard to tell at first. The fur was still damp. The eyes glazed but open. Staring at the clouds like it had just seen something it didn't quite understand. They worked fast. Blades, some stone. Some bone moved with practiced ease, no waste. Organs placed in bowls of bark, blood collected with moss to thicken it for later, hooves set aside for tools, the hide peeled back like cloth dot, and then finally the meat, sliced into strips, some to be dried, some to be smoked, and some for. Now someone prepared the fire, adding sweeter wood. Birch bark for spark, then branches with a scent like sugar when they burned. You didn't know trees could smell like that, but they can. And as the flames caught, and the first slices of meat hit the hot stone, you felt your mouth water. It wasn't just hunger, it was memory. Somewhere in the back of your mind, something ancestral stirred, because this sent the crisp edge of cooking fat, The snap of muscle releasing its last tension. It spoke across time. You took your share when it was passed around, a strip no wider than 2 fingers. It was chewy, slightly charred dot with a taste that was part smoke, part iron, part something wild, not gamey, just honest. It filled your mouth the way stories fill a room, slowly, richly, layer by layer. You chewed in silence. And next to you, a woman nodded without looking, as if to say, yes, this is what we wait for. And you understood. It wasn't about flavor. It was about proof that the world, even in its coldest hours, still offered gifts. You licked the juice from your fingertips, warm and sticky. Someone passed a bark cup filled with hot broth, just a little, boiled from bone and root, savory and sharp, with the faintest sweetness, like the echo of a buried fruit. You drank slow, letting it coat your throat, letting it remind you you're still here. They all were, and night was still far off. Later that day, the sky did something strange. It wasn't a storm, not really, but the clouds rolled in low and fast, heavy with something unsaid. The air thickened, not with snow, but scent wet bark, moss, and the earthy smell of old rain returning to new ground. You watched as the light dimmed, not too black, but to silver, soft, diffused, like the world had been tucked under a wool blanket. The camp didn't panic. They knew this light dot. It meant water, which meant frogs. And where there were frogs, there would soon be birds, eggs, and if the ground stayed soft, tubers. Those knobbly strange things that looked like warts, but tasted like bitter carrots, if boiled 3 times. Everyone prepared, not with flurry, just quiet purpose. Bundles tightened, spears checked, slings tested. One boy strung his cord with smooth stones he'd picked carefully round, flat, the kind that kissed the air when thrown. You followed him a while. He led you through a patch of old trees, not tall ones, but wide, their trunks scarred by age, their roots curled like sleeping hands. In the clearing, he pointed. There beneath, a log movement, a twitch, a flicker of leg, frog, not big, maybe half the length of his palm, but it was enough. With a slow breath, he moved, not rushed. The sling swung once, twice, and the stone struck just behind the eye. Clean. Hugh blinked. He didn't cheer, just walked over, picked it up gently, and placed it in a pouch lined with moss. The quietest kind of victory. You helped gather a few more, never too many, always enough. Their skin was slick, cold, their bellies pale. They smelled faintly of pond water and survival. Back at camp, a few were cleaned, skinned, roasted on sticks, angled toward the fire. You weren't sure how to feel, but when one was passed to you, seasoned only with a pinch of ash you bit in, it was soft, a little rubbery, the kind of meat that doesn't bite back, just fades, and oddly, a little sweet, not sugary, just gentle, like it had grown in silence and hadn't learned how to shout. You chewed slowly and found yourself nodding. This was good, not a feast but real. Another group returned, not long after, carrying a basket made from woven willow. Inside were the first eggs of the season, small, speckled, cool to the touch. You held one in your palm, so light, so impossibly fragile, and yet it had made it through the snow, the wind, the claws and teeth and frozen nights. That was a kind of strength. Someone cracked one open onto a hot stone. It sizzled instantly, the white going milky, the yolk holding steady in the center, like the sun refusing to set. You dipped a strip of root into it, scooped up a little of everything, tasted warm, bright, velvety. Like a dream you half remembered from childhood, you closed your eyes, and around you, the camp pulsed with quiet life. Not celebration, just gratitude. The storm above was shifting, but down here under willow baskets and frog skins and stories, past without words, there was peace. A deep, old peace. The kind that comes not from safety, but from understanding that nothing stays the same. And somehow, that's okay. That night, the wind returned, but this time, it wasn't angry. It didn't scream down the hills or bite at the skin. It hummed, a low, rolling sound that wrapped around the camp like an old lullaby, one you didn't know the words to, but felt all the same. You sat near the fire again, closer this time. The logs popped and snapped, but gently, like they were exhaling, letting go of something. The meat had been cooked and shared, frogs roasted, eggs eaten, broth sipped down to the last drop. Now came the stillness. Not sleep, not yet, just the quiet before. A woman sat across from you, her hands busy with thread. Not thread as you know it, but long strips of sinew twisted tight between her fingers. She worked them like magic, pulling and folding until a cord took shape. She didn't look up, didn't need to. Her hands had done this thousands of times. You watched, hypnotized, and then something small and unexpected. She laughed, a short, breathy thing, half amusement, half memory, and without looking, she pointed to your feet. You followed her gaze and saw your toes caked in mud, half frozen and dangling far too close to the edge of the fire. You pulled them back with a sheepish grunt. She smiled, not unkindly, just knowingly. Someone passed a pouch toward her. Inside, you caught the scent of something sweet, real sweet, not root sweet, not bone sweet, but actual, honest goodness, sweetness. It was dried honeycomb, crushed and mixed with pine resin, a kind of proto-candy. You were offered a pinch. You took it, let it melt on your tongue, slow and stubborn. It tasted like smoke and sap and the ghost of a summer long past. It wasn't sugary like your time's treats. No syrup, no caramel, but it had depth. It lingered, and in that moment, you saw why they made it. Not to feast, not even to impress, but to remember, to carry the warmth of the sun into the coldest nights. A child beside you was already asleep, curled against a dog-like creature. Not quite a dog, too thick, too wild around the eyes, but loyal. It snored in small bursts, feet twitching like it dreamed of chasing something small and fast. The stars were beginning to blink through the clouds now, and above you, the trees swayed slow, dancers with endless patience. The camp had quieted, just the occasional crackle of fire, the shift of fur, the sigh of someone letting go of the day. And slowly, you joined them. First your legs relaxed, then your shoulders, then your jaw. The wind sang a little lower now, brushing the leaves in a rhythm that matched your breath. And as your eyes closed, you thought about sweetness, how it shows up in the unlikeliest places, not always in cakes or sugar or fruit, but in small moments, in warmth shared around fire, in meat that reminds you you're alive, in laughter from a stranger, in the soft weight of a blanket pulled over your knees. And you realized this life, as brutal as it was, had sweetness, just enough, and that was all it needed. So you let go of the fire, let go of the frog bones and the eggshells, and the thread twisting endlessly in careful hands. Let the honey melt one last time, and let your breath drift like smoke into the stars. There's something strange about the last stretch of winter. It doesn't leave all at once. It lingers, like a guest who's packed their things, put on their coat, but keeps finding one more thing to say before the door shuts. The Neanderthals knew this dance. The sudden thaw, then another freeze, then a thaw again, slush that turned to ice overnight. Footprints hardened in mud like fossils, left for tomorrow's strangers to study. You felt it in your bones, the back and forth. One day, the sun kissed your skin. The next, you woke with frost in your nostrils. But there was movement now, real movement. The herd had shifted. Not just a few reindeer, but many. A migration, the kind of change that stirred every instinct in the camp. That said, it's time. They didn't rush. They never did. But there was urgency in their quiet. You helped pack, which really meant you tried not to get in the way. Hides were rolled tight, tied with twisted cord, tools checked, sharpened, sheathed, firestone, bundled in bark so it wouldn't dampen from meltwater and food. Not much, just dried slices of meat, a few roasted roots, a pinch of that honey resin tucked away like treasure, enough to last 3 nights, maybe 4. They'd find more on the trail. Or they wouldn't, but they were going, and so were you. The first day on the move was strange. Not hard, just slow. The snow had softened, turned patchy. Each step landed with a dull squish. Not quite a splash, not quite a crunch. Birds trailed overhead, small ones, with round bellies and frantic wings. And beneath your feet, the ground sighed, like it had been waiting. You passed an old hunting site. Just bones now, half sunk in mud. The ribs sticking out like the frame of a collapsed tent. Someone paused, plucked one free, not out of grief, but use. It could be carved, sharpened, bent into something. New, you kept walking, and the path curved into a grove. The air there was, warm relatively speaking, a kind of pocket of peace. You heard the sound of dripping, steady, measured, and then water, real water, not ice, not snow, but liquid, a shallow stream, trickling along like it had something to say, but didn't want to raise its voice. Everyone stopped. One woman bent to touch it, then laughed, soft and short, like she couldn't quite believe it was true. You drank from cupped hands. It was cold, yes, but smooth, no grit, no salt, like the world had filtered it just for this moment. And just as you finished, something ADA smelled sharp, green, electric dot wild onions. Someone had spotted the leaves. Poking through a patch of exposed earth, they gathered them carefully. Not too many, just enough to crush between fingers, inhale and smile. Later, those would be added to broth, but now, it was just a scent, a promise. You kept moving, and as the day wound down and the light bent golden through bare branches, you began to understand something. The road wasn't just about food, or warmth, or survival. It was about memory. This place, this trail, they had walked it before. As children, as mothers, as hunters, as lost souls looking for something better. And they would walk it again. Not because it was safe, but because it was theirs. And as you stepped forward, breath slow, feet sinking softly into the thawing soil, you felt it too. The weight of all the feet that came before you, and the hush of all the stories they left behind. That night, they didn't make a big fire, just a small one, enough to dry their feet, to keep the damp from creeping too far into the bones. You sat on a patch of pine needles. They smelled clean, bright, like they were pretending to be spring, even if the sky hadn't caught up yet. Nearby, someone was cooking something in a small stone bowl, not boiling exactly, just warming. It was a paste, thick, brown, a little sticky, and it smelled, how do I say it, familiar, not like meat, or fat, or roots, but toasted nutty. You leaned closer, curious. The woman stirred it with a stick, then tapped off a bit onto a flat stone to cool. She broke off a piece and offered it to you. It was soft, crumbly, still warm. You took a bite and blinked. It was sweet. Not bright, sugary sweet, but warm sweet, like roasted chestnut and dried berry mashed into a kind of ancient cookie. A little grainy, a little chewy, but rich, deep, the kind of thing that fills the mouth and stays there long. After it's gone, you looked at her. She just smiled. There weren't words, but her eyes said, "Yeah, I know." They didn't eat it often. The ingredients were too precious. Crushed nuts, dried berries from last season, maybe a little marrow fat to hold it together. But when they did, it meant something. Not a celebration, more like a marker. That winter was truly behind you, that you'd made it, more or less, and now it was okay to taste comfort again. Others got their piece. Some took it fast. Some slow. One man tucked his into a pouch, saving it, maybe, for a harder day. You let yours dissolve in your mouth, slowly, like a secret. Later, when the stars pressed in and the fire sagged low, someone began to hum. Not a song, not really, just a note held low, wavering. Then another joined in, and another, until the whole camp buzzed with this quiet harmony. Not loud, not pretty, even, but full, throaty. Like bees dreaming underground. You leaned back, looking up through the trees. They looked different now. Not just tall, but watchful. And for the first time, you wondered how many of them had stood here the last time your people walked this path. 100 winters ago, more. How many songs had drifted into their bark? How many footsteps had shaken their roots? The air grew colder again. But you didn't mind. Your stomach was warm. Your feet were dry. There was smoke in your hair, and something ancient still dancing across your tongue. The nut paste, the hum, the pine needle bed. It all wove together. A kind of hush, a soft ending that hadn't finished yet. And as your eyes closed, you thought of that sweetness again. How it waited for the right time. How it didn't demand attention, but stayed there, tucked deep inside the hard things, until the thaw, until the trail, until someone said, without saying, "Yes, you've earned this." You let the hum settle into your chest, and the wind carry the rest. By the third day, the world had changed. The snow was mostly gone. Patches of green peeked through the mud, tentative but certain, like the earth had been holding its breath and finally let go. Your boots, if you could call them, that was soaked, but your feet didn't mind. There was heat in the air now. Subtle, but real. You saw it in the animals. 2 birds, boulder tracks fresh, the hum of insects daring to return. It was the sound of risk, of life peeking out before the frost was fully finished. The group slowed near a ridge. Below, a small valley opened, not wide, but lush. Even now, in early thaw, there was color. A trickle of water. Tufts of grass that looked almost neon after so much gray. The eldest among them, an old man with a jaw like mountain stone, pointed. That was the place. The spring shelter, cave, really. Hidden beneath an overhang and draped with vines still bare. You walked toward it. Together, quietly. Not because it was sacred, but because it was familiar. Like returning to a childhood room that hadn't changed, inside. The air was cool, dry. The walls bore old marks, scratches, ash smudges. Tiny red ochre handprints that hadn't belonged to anyone. Still breathing, you ran your hand along the stone. It was smooth in places, worn down by seasons of leaning, sleeping, waiting. They unpacked quickly, tools unwrapped, stones placed where they always were. Fire kindled at the same spot, ash, meeting old ashdot. And as night came, there was laughter, more now, not loud, but loose. That kind that comes when you're full and warm and the roof doesn't leak. They cooked what little was left. Broth flavored with wild onions, root, mash with marrow, and surprise of handful of dried berries someone had kept hidden until now. They burst in your mouth, tangy and sun-sweet, like summer had whispered back. A child sat beside you, munching loudly, content, and outside, the moon rose low and golden. A firefly blinked once, then again, and suddenly you were surrounded by those soft green in silence, blinking in a rhythm older than any calendar. It didn't feel magical. It felt right, like the world was doing what it had always done. And you were lucky enough to be still enough to see it. As the fire faded to red and the cave filled with quiet breathing, you lay back against your rolled furs and looked out toward the stars. They weren't different, but you were. Something had shifted. Not much, just enough. You had walked where others had walked, eaten what they ate, shivered and smiled, and waited and hoped. You had seen the brutal life, the raw edge, but also the softness inside it, the moments of sweetness that made the rest bearable. Various song, the sound of someone humming behind you in the dark. You closed your eyes, not because you were tired, but because there was nothing more to see tonight, and nothing left to fear. The cave would hold. The warmth would last. And even if it didn't, two had made it this far. Far enough to rest. Far enough to dream. And as sleep crept in soft as moss, deep as time itself, you let go of the cold, of the trail, of the fireflies blinking you gently to sleep. And you drifted into stillness, into quiet, into the long, peaceful breath of the earth itself. May these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. If you drifted off, let me know below. Sweet dreams. Boring history for sleep. Signing off.